This happened to me when I was a teenager, and it still haunts me to this day. I was babysitting for my neighbor across the street, Alice. I babysat for her often, almost every weekend, so we were very comfortable with one another and had a good routine. Rarely, Alice would have a friend sleep over, and on this particular night, that was the case. Jennifer was a first-time sleepover date, so she was a bit nervous, but I did my best to make her happy. Alice's parents left around 6:30 p.m., setting the alarm behind them as they went. I bathed both girls and got them into bed to watch some Nickelodeon, as was our usual routine. Once the girls were happy, I went to the kitchen to grab some snacks. It was pouring rain outside, and next to the kitchen was a breakfast nook with glass doors and a series of glass windows. As I was preparing to walk back into the room, the phone rang. Alice's parents called often, so I always answered the phone. I picked up the phone and asked who it was.
"Hi, how are you?"
A male voice asked. "Hi, I'm doing well," I replied. "Are you calling for Jason, Alice's father? He isn't home, but I can take a message."
"Maybe,"
he said to me.
"Or maybe I'm calling to talk to you."
Now, my spidey sense wasn't ringing just yet, and I figured it was just a family member or a friend who was bored and wanted to chat. I politely, but quickly, said that I had to go. The girls were calling for me to bring their snacks, so I hung up the phone. I brought Alice and Jennifer their snacks and was about to settle into the reclining chair in Alice's room when I heard the phone ring again. I hustled back to the kitchen to answer it without really thinking anything was peculiar. At least, not yet.
"You know, it's rude to hang up on people, don't you?"
He started off, but he wasn't angry or aggressive. It was a little hard to hear him over the thunder and rain, and both girls were calling for me to come back because they were scared of the thunder. "I'm sorry, I have to get back to the girls. Have a nice night." I heard him say something, but I hung up before I could hear what he said. The phone rang again.
"Don't hang up on me,"
he said, with anger in his voice. I hung up. I was getting nervous at this point. I went back in the room with the girls, and the phone rang again. At that point, Alice was asking me not to leave her again, so I didn't answer. But the phone rang again and again. 10 minutes then passed without a call, and the phone rang again. This time, I thought that perhaps it was Alice's parents, so I peeled myself away from the girls to go answer the phone.
"You fucking don't you fucking hang up on me,"
he screamed. "Leave me alone. If you call again, I will call the cops, you fucking psycho," I screamed back. I hung up the phone and turned around to see Alice and Jennifer were now standing behind me. They looked terrified, so I offered to get them some ice cream bars from the freezer. I went to the freezer and the phone rang again. Alice answered it. I don't know what he was saying, but I heard screaming, and Alice looked absolutely terrified. I grabbed the phone and was about to unleash on him when he said,
"That's a nice pink shirt you're wearing."
I hung up the phone and realized that not only was I wearing a pink shirt, but during that second phone call I received, there was a clap of thunder that I heard on the phone. At the same time, I heard it in the house. It wasn't until that moment that the realization hit me. Now, I was a teenager at that point, thinking I was invincible and having no concept of my own mortality, but a higher sense of consciousness kicked in and guided my next few actions. I hit the light switch in the kitchen as it controlled most of the lights in that immediate area. I grabbed both girls, their barking dog Alex, and shoved all of us into the pantry. The pantry door opened inward, so I pushed up against the shelves and I shoved a giant bag of rice against the door. I then had my back against the shelf, my feet pushing against the rice to help secure the door, and I had a girl in each arm with my hands over their mouths. I pinned the dog between my legs, and although he constantly barked, he somehow knew to stay quiet at that moment. Then the alarm started sounding, and the phone started ringing. All of us were trembling, but I was determined not to cry in front of the girls. Between the alarm and the thunderstorm, I couldn't hear much. After what felt like an hour, I heard a female's voice calling and asking if anyone was in the house. She was in front of the pantry and announced that she was a police officer and that it was safe to come out. She clearly knew I wasn't going to take her on her word, so she slid a badge under the door. I moved 1 foot from the bag of rice, and I towed her badge towards me. The police had turned the lights on, so I was able to see from the light streaming in under the pantry door that this was, in fact, a badge. I cautiously made my way out of the pantry, shielding the girls behind me. The female officer, Officer Wesley, didn't look alarmed at all, and I quickly realized why. "It's scary when the alarm goes off," she said, "but next time you need to answer the phone and let the alarm company know that everything's okay instead of hiding. Sending officers out to a house isn't a joke." I looked at her incredulously. "We didn't set off the alarm," I said, stammering, and I started to cry. "We haven't opened any doors." She looked at me with confusion and said, "Then who made those footprints?" From the back door, the sliding glass door in the kitchen nook, to the pantry and out of the front door were muddy footprints, as if someone had paced in front of the door for a while. The footprints led out of the front door, which was still open when the police arrived. I was hysterical, and the police called Jason and Janelle, Alice's parents, to come home from the restaurant they were at. Within earshot, but clearly not meant for me to overhear, Officer Wesley's partner informed her that the door of the nook had been pried open. I looked out over the pool deck and could see where the trail of footprints had started, from the grass and into the house. They were mostly dissolved at that point due to the rain, but it was very clear that someone had walked from the side of Alice's house and towards the glass door. We waited for Alice's parents to come home before I left. When the police recounted the night's events, I remember thinking in passing that neither of Alice's parents looked as terrified as I thought they should have, given the events of the evening. The police walked me home and told my parents what happened. My mother and father were both very, very upset. A few extra officers patrolled the neighborhood for a few weeks, but never caught the perpetrator, nor was he ever heard from again. And I never babysat for Alice again. I was too frightened. Fast forward a few years, and Jason, Alice's father, went to prison for tax evasion, or so we were told. Years later, when I was at home visiting, I ran into Jason as he was leaving the house on his motorcycle. He stopped to chat with me, and I asked him the one nagging question I'd had for years. "Did you really go to jail for tax evasion?" Now, at that point, Jason and Janelle were divorced. She left him for her dead sister's husband, which is pretty dark, and I guess Jason didn't feel like he needed to keep up any pretenses. He told me that, no, he was sent to prison for drug running. He regaled me with the tale of how he was caught in a high-speed chase, and bragged about how he was one of the biggest dealers in the area for years, until he was busted. And then I knew. The person who was calling that night was trying to exact some sort of punishment on Jason. Maybe he was a rival dealer, or maybe Jason worked for him and had pissed him off. But that's why Jason and Janelle didn't seem as alarmed as they should have. By the grace of God and an alarm system, we were not killed that night, but I knew that Jason's actions had led to that night's events. I knew in my gut. This haunts me to this day, and I think helped solidify a healthy understanding of my own mortality, as well as the depravity that may be within others. I'm not overly paranoid, but I'm cautious, and I think rightly so. My stupid teenage antics, for the most part, stopped dead in their tracks. Thank you for reading. When I was around 15, I had started babysitting a family with 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl. Their mom knew me as the oldest was friends with my little brother and had asked my mom if I could help out, just because she had started taking on more shifts and her husband was doing the same. They lived right next to my high school and paid well, so I agreed, despite not really having that much experience. Pretty quickly, I realized that it was going to be difficult. The kids were great, but I was nervous around them. The oldest was fine, just played on his Xbox most of the time, or done homework. But the two youngest were a different story. The middle child, daughter, was completely obsessed with horror movies, and on more than one occasion, I had to hide the knives from her since she wanted to reenact them, and the youngest son tried to set fire to the Christmas tree. I know what kids can be like since I have a lot of younger and older cousins, but these ones drove me insane, and I would constantly worry about them hurting themselves or each other. If they played up, I would threaten to call their mom, which normally would work. It was after a few months that I realized if I had mentioned the dad, that's when they would really just behave and do what I had asked, so that's what I started doing. Now, I never really ever met the dad. I just knew that the guy was really tall and big built, but was always described to me as still being really nice, so I never thought about it. On this occasion, I had said to the youngest boy that I would call his dad if he didn't start behaving, which resulted in a huge tantrum. So I ended up calling him and explaining. Luckily for me, the dad was getting off work early, so he said that he would get home as quick as he could and apologized for his kid's behavior. When I had explained this, the kid was sobbing and ended up locking himself in his room. That day, the dad got home, and they weren't joking when they said he was tall. I'm only 5'3" and was 15. When I saw him having to crouch a little to get through the door because of his size, I remember thinking, oh shit, no wonder the kids won't misbehave when he's here. I said hi and apologized for the work call, which he just brushed off and said that it needed to be done and not to worry. We were both sat on the couch. I can't really remember why, but I think we were talking about what days they needed me for. Now, at this stage, the two youngest had went outside to play while I was in with the oldest, as I had just been tidying a little from dinner. I was pretty weirded out because his oldest started to get pretty antsy when asked to go to the shop, kept making excuses to his dad, so I had just offered to go. I could see the dad visibly frustrated and just wanted to defuse the situation. Now, I would like to point out that everything seemed normal at this point, but I remember feeling really intimidated by the dad. I'd only met him this one time and spoke for no more than 20 minutes. It turns out that the oldest had said to his mom that he didn't want me left alone with his dad, as he had apparently been watching me a little too closely during our short encounter. The parents had asked me to babysit later on in that week, which I had agreed to. However, in the space of a few days, that quickly changed. I got a text from my mom apologizing for the last-minute arrangements, but saying that I couldn't babysit. I was a little agitated since I had changed plans, but I wasn't too bothered and just said it was fine and just let me know when she needs me. She had asked me to come round to get my pay for the last 2 weeks, and I decided to just nip round before going home. As soon as I was in the house, I could tell something was off, but not wanting to pry, I just went in, say hi, talked about books for a little bit, and left. It wasn't until the next week, I think, or a week after, where everything kicked off. I came home to my mom being upset and angry, pacing the living room while my stepdad was trying to calm her down. I immediately went to her, asking what was wrong, feeling a little worried. Instantly, she just threw her arms around me and started crying and holding me. I had meant to be babysitting, but again, got canceled on, so I was home earlier than what I had said originally. Pulling away, confused, I asked her what was wrong again. Turns out, my mom had been trying to get a hold of me, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit and no one was home, so I just decided to head back on the bus, but wasn't able to let my mom know. She sits me down and starts trying to ask me questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I had mentioned that I only met him once and only really spoke to him on the phone a handful of times when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mom started pressing on and asked if anything else had happened and kept questioning me, saying I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused and told her that nothing had happened and asked what this was all about. I always remember her taking a deep breath and saying, "Oh, thank God," before letting me know what happened. Now, As I said, the details are vague because this was on the news. Turns out, the guy had killed someone while working and had been taken in by police. During interrogation, it turns out that he admitted to beating his wife, and there were speculations of assaults. There was also mention that one of his types were petite girls that had dark hair, pale, which happened to match my description at the time, and my mom was terrified in case something had happened. I'm turning 23 this year, and it still gives me shivers. I remember feeling like I was going to throw up, and had a sinking feeling in my stomach. My mom held me close, crying, because she had been worried sick all day and scared in case something had happened. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for the family right there and then. I had felt so awful for the wife, as she was honestly one of the nicest women I had ever met. About 1 week later, I got a text from her, as it turns out I had left some books, so I had said I would go get them after phone. When I saw her, my heart sank. She had obviously not slept and was putting on a brave face for the kids, who weren't sure what was going on. We ended up sitting in the kitchen, and I gave her a hug, just trying to comfort her. I had mentioned that if she needed help with the kids, since he was gone, I would try and help, but she immediately refuses. As it turned out, people had started attacking the house. She gave me my stuff, paid for the wages with a little more added, I had completely forgot, and she said she appreciated it, but we'd be better off if I took a step back from the family, as she didn't want me getting hurt for being associated with them. To this day, I still think about them, and it still scares me after thinking about what could have happened. I still talk to the younger kids, who are a lot older, and even help tutor the younger girl. I helped the oldest when he started high school because I noticed the kids bullying him for what his dad had done, which was awful considering it wasn't the fault of the family. But yeah, let's not meet, you psychopath. Two years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for these two ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m., and the boys were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads and whatnot, when somebody knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over, and they both said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a gray hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I can't see his face. Immediately, I'm like, nope, 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 and don't say anything and start pacing around because I don't want to give him any inclination we're inside. A couple minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains, and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just kind of let it go as a prank. Cut to a few hours later, and the moms get back. They ask me how everything was, and I say the kids were great, but someone had come to the door. They ask me what time, and I say around 8, and one of the moms starts freaking out and going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, someone had been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like,
I can see you through your window.
They didn't think it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were. But in retrospect, we're almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later, and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that. But I'm just really glad I didn't open that door because I have a feeling in my gut it would have been really bad.